The needle bit my fingertip just as the fire alarm in my chest went off, and I knew before the blood welled that today would draw its own red line through my life. If you've ever been blindsided by family on a day that was supposed to be perfect, stick with me to the end and hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and share this with someone who needs a little courage. I eased the pearl back into place. 6 months of evenings had pooled into the silk stretched across my kitchen table. French seams lay flat as a secret. Hand-rolled hems curved like a prayer. The ivory charmeuse cost me 2 weeks of groceries, but I'd make peanut butter toast forever if it meant my daughter would walk down the aisle wrapped in proof she'd always been loved. My name is Marisol Reyes, 62, retired art teacher with stubborn hands. My husband, Daniel, has been gone since our girl was 12. The house in Santa Fe settled around us like a shawl after he died. My daughter is Lila, her father's dimple, my inability to do anything halfway. Today she would marry a man from a family that could set entire tables with a single last name. The wedding was at La Fonda on the plaza, with prices that made my pension shake. I wrapped the dress in tissue my mother would have approved of. The hallway mirror showed a woman trimmed by practicality and sharpened by years of making ends meet. I tucked loose hair behind my ear, kissed the garment bag, and drove the miles from my adobe to the plaza where tourists drifted and bells kept time. The bridal suite was a small city of gloss. Makeup stations lit like interrogations, buckets of white ranunculus and pale marigolds posing as New Mexican minimalism. Vivian Hart, the groom's mother, held court near the window. Her dress was champagne-colored, her earrings large enough to have histories. Lila sat in a low chair while a stylist coaxed her hair into place. She looked radiant and slightly stunned. She saw me, and her face lit the way it used to when she was 7. "Mom. You're here. Is that it?" "It is." I set the garment bag on the bed like a sleeping cat and unzipped with care. The silk caught the light, and for a moment even the photographer stopped clicking. Vivian's smile was professional. "Oh, how thoughtful, Marisol. Handmade." She said it like it meant optional. Lila stood, touched the bodice where seed pearls curved like constellations. She swallowed. "Mom, we talked about a backup." "A backup?" The stylist adjusted a light. Vivian's tone was honeyed. "The Vera from Atelier Hartman is hanging in the closet. It photographs beautifully. This one is more rustic." Rustic. My mother would have rolled that word in flour and fried it until it begged for mercy. I kept my face steady. "If the other dress makes you happiest," I said, "we should put you in the other dress." Lila searched my face, found only invitation, and reached for the Vera. Vivian exhaled like a pilot clearing cloud cover. I stepped into the hall with my dress in my arms. The door didn't latch fully. Words slid through the gap. "Thank God," Vivian said. "Can you imagine the photos? People would ask where that came from." Lila's laugh was small and nervous. "If anyone asks, I'll say it didn't fit. It does look a little thrift store on camera." The sentence slid between bone and stubbornness. I zipped the dress into its cocoon and carried it down the elevator like precious cargo for a different journey. Santa Fe in late afternoon is a painter who refuses to clean her brush. The plaza hummed with guitars and languages leaning toward one another. I put the dress in my back seat and drove past Canyon Road galleries. My house on Agua Fria welcomed me with the cool of thick walls. I spread the dress on the table where honest light found every quiet decision. The phone lit once. "Lila." I didn't answer. I brewed coffee dark enough to shame doubt and sat with the dress in silence. 3 days passed. No flowers. No apologies. Just my kitchen, my hands, and the clarity that arrives when no one is looking. On the 4th morning someone knocked. A young woman stood with a foil-covered pan. "Marisol. I'm Ana Delgado." I work at Paloma's on Alameda. I used to know Lila. She told me what happened. Well, she called crying from Cabo and I connected the dots. I opened the door for the enchiladas. Then Anna saw the dress and said a prayer entirely in vowels. She stepped closer, fingers hovering. Señora, this is art. I went to fashion school for a year before my dad got sick. That hem is a thesis. That beading is a love letter. I laughed for the first time since the hotel. She talked technique like someone who'd lived inside a seam. She asked if she could bring her cousin, Noelle, who was getting married behind her grandmother's adobe in 3 weeks and had a budget that could only stretch to polyester. Bring her. Noelle arrived with wind-tangled hair and a smile that belonged to people who make room for everyone else. She touched the dress and pulled her hand back. I can't. This is for cathedrals and chandeliers. My wedding has string lights. Try it. 20 minutes later the silk found her shape as if months had been waiting for her. Anna took a photo that made my house brighter. Noelle cried the good kind. I said wear it with joy and pay me with stories. Anna posted the photo with words that made me sit up straighter. When your friend's mom is a secret couture genius and the world needs to know. She hit publish. The world came. That night my phone vibrated until my table hummed. By morning, the photo had escaped our neighborhood. Messages came from Albuquerque, Denver, Austin. People asked if I took commissions. Women told me about body stores ignored. By lunch, a producer from a local station asked if I could talk about Southwest craftsmanship in modern weddings. I said I needed time to think and then laughed because time was the one thing I had finally stolen back. The doorbell rang again. A bouquet sat on the porch, ribbon neat, card saying proud of you in handwriting that had once written me letters from camp. I left it in the heat and went back inside to the dress that proved some work cannot be dismissed, not even by the people you raise to know better. I did not plan to start a business the week a wedding taught me new grammar for love. I planned to make Noelle's day holy with silk and then return to quiet. But momentum has a scent, and once you smell it you can't turn away. Anna arrived the next morning with coffee from Iconic and a notebook. She'd drawn 3 headings: materials, time, prices. You made a cathedral in that kitchen, she said. Now we decide if it's a one-time miracle or a chapel that opens every day. I told her I knew how to make things but not how to sell them without apologizing for the price. She said apologizing is a habit, not a virtue. We costed silk by the yard, calculated hours against hands, and landed on numbers that could keep my lights on. She registered a simple site with a name that made both of us grin. Needle and North. A direction and a tool. The messages kept coming. Not the kind that ask can you do it cheaper, but the kind that say I don't want to disappear in my wedding photos. They told me about scars from surgeries, hips that tell the truth, shoulders that make store clerks sigh. I answered each one like it was a person. By Thursday, the local station confirmed a segment. Friday at 3. They wanted footage of the dress, me sewing, and maybe a client. Noelle said, put my joy on television and tell them it was born in an adobe kitchen that smells like cumin and coffee. We practiced what I might say, then decided no one believes practiced. Lila called while Anna was pinning a swatch. Mom. Her voice was careful, like she was walking across ice. I heard about the photo. And the news. And I cut thread with my teeth. And I think this attention is good, she said, as if offering approval. But you have to be realistic. Rayon blends. Pre-made appliques. Mark says scaling is about efficiency. I've done efficient, I said. 30 years teaching 2 classes in 1 slot and grading papers while stirring beans. This is not that. This is the thing I refuse to let die. Maybe lunch, she said. We can talk strategy. I looked at Anna, who mouthed no. I told Lila I had fittings and a call with the station and would call her after the week. She said okay, but it didn't sound like okay. The station sent a cameraman and a reporter named Javier who wore a bolo tie with a silver Thunderbird. He listened when I talked about hand-rolling hems, filmed my hands more than my face. He asked how it felt when my work was called thrift store and how it felt now. I said both mattered. One taught me where the ground wasn't, the other taught me to build my own. They aired the segment that night. My house looked like a place where possibility sleeps on the couch. The camera lingered on Noelle spinning in the dress while her cousin's trumpet pushed sunlight through the room. They posted the clip online. It caught a nerve. By Saturday, I'd booked 4 consultations and said no to 3 because saying no protects yes. Anna and I cleared my spare room, brought in a dress form, a second table, a better lamp. She painted, made by hand, on wood and hung it above the doorway. It looked like a chapel after all. I didn't answer Lila's second or third call. When she texted a magazine spread featuring her in the Vera, I wrote beautiful. When she texted again about the news framing her choice, I put my phone face down and pressed a seam open. Noelle's backyard wedding smelled of roasted chili and orange oil rubbed into benches. Her grandmother cried with her whole shoulders. The dress made her feel entirely herself while insisting the world see her that way too. A cousin filmed and posted it. I went home to the sound of Daniel's record player in my head. On Monday, the emails shifted from "Can you make one dress" to "Can we talk about a feature?" Pacific Sun magazine wanted a photo essay on regional artisans. A podcast wanted to talk about age and reinvention. A boutique in Taos asked about a capsule of silk blouses. The language changed from little hobby to work. From sweet to skill. This is where I tell you there was a cost. It came in a voicemail from Lila that began with "Mom please" and trembled in the middle. She had heard from the producer that the piece mentioned the hotel and a remark and how it felt. She said reputation and fairness and complications. She said we agreed to keep family things private. I heard the fear that people would connect the thrift store sentence to the Vera. Anna found me staring at my phone and put coffee in my hand. "We can protect your dignity without destroying hers," she said. "We can tell the truth with compassion." I said I'd try. Then I threaded the needle and worked until the sky forgot to be blue. At week's end, 4 women stood in my kitchen at different times, each saying I didn't know clothes could make me stop apologizing for existing. I fit a mother of the groom who'd stopped going to parties after chemo. I draped silk for a judge who wanted a dress that didn't make her choose between authority and softness. I basted a bodice for a baker with forearms like a promise. Each reached for the mirror like it was a friend who'd come back. That night I lay awake listening to Canyon Wind and wondered if success is just permission to be who you were at 15, sewing a skirt out of your mother's curtains. I fell asleep designing a coat, black wool, lining the color of persimmon. No one would see it unless they knew to look. The next morning the phone rang with a number I didn't know. The caller said Netflix, documentary, late life transformation. I said those words don't usually share a table. He laughed. Maybe they should. I told him I'd think about it. Then I called Anna and said we need a calendar that lives on the wall, not in my head. She arrived with butcher paper and a grin. We sketched 8 weeks in ink. It looked like a map you could follow. Some days move like a river, others like a verdict. The day my daughter opened the studio door was both. We just signed a short-term lease on a corner space off Guadalupe Street with windows tall enough to make silk look like weather. The landlord, an optimist, said pay what you can for 2 months and bring empanadas if the check is late. Anna hung muslin curtains with brass clips. I arranged spools of thread by shade, a rainbow if the desert had invented it. The sign painter lettered Needle and North, with strokes that made my name feel like it belonged on glass. Before noon, 2 clients arrived. A retired firefighter who wanted to look tender without feeling exposed. A violinist whose shoulders carried her work and her joy. Fittings felt like the opposite of hiding. Lila stood on the sidewalk for a long time before coming in. She wore a coat the color of oyster shells and a face trained to show applause while calculating implications. When she crossed the threshold, she paused as if the air was heavier. "It's beautiful," she said, without qualifiers. "Thank you." Her eyes moved over the dress forms, photos of Noelle under string lights, of the firefighter in green crepe, the judge in midnight silk. She studied the room like a corner she might turn only if the view suited her. "The magazine piece," she began, and stopped. It had run that morning with a headline neither of us loved, "The Seamstress Who Stole the Season." The main story was generous, telling of a woman who made something with her hands and then with her life. The sidebar told a wedding day story, a bright room, and a sentence that landed like a slap. Faces blurred, intent clear. "You didn't know they'd include that," she said. "I didn't pitch it." They asked. I answered. I told the truth at a volume I could hear. Her mouth trembled. "I made a mistake. I was scared, trying to make everything perfect. I hurt you." "Yes." She looked toward the window where winter light made lace on the floor. "I need to fix it." "You can't fix it." "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Respect it. Pain doesn't vanish because the photos turned out pretty or because I built a business. It sits there like a marker, asking us to route around it so we stop driving over the same wound." She closed her eyes, then opened them with the look she had as a child handing me a broken toy. "Teach me. I don't know this part." We were interrupted by Mrs. Ortiz, a client arriving in a storm of gratitude for finding parking. She brought biscochitos because the studio needed to smell like Christmas in February. Lila stepped aside and watched as Mrs. Ortiz tried on a jacket I'd cut to fall where her story asked to be honored, not hidden. In the mirror she whispered, "There I am." Lila watched, and I watched Lila watching, and something in me loosened. After Mrs. Ortiz left, Lila walked to the photo wall. "I didn't know clothes could do this for people," she said. "I thought it was just about looking nice." Anna came in then, cheeks bright from the cold. She saw the moment, slid into the space with ease. "Hi. I'm Anna. I'm the calendar, the coffee, and the part of this that believes impossible just means we haven't done it yet." Lila smiled, thanked her for the Instagram post. They spoke about venues, vendors, and how weddings can turn love into a performance. For a few minutes, they were simply two women comparing notes in a sunlit room that smelled faintly of starch and cinnamon. When Lila left, she hugged me cautiously. At the door she said, "I'm going to write an email to the magazine. Not a correction, a confession. I want to tell them I laughed because I was scared you were bigger than the room, and I didn't know how to be the daughter of a woman who didn't need my approval. I won't promise to send it. I promise to write it." I nodded. Promises to yourself are the ones that teach your hands a new way to move. After she was gone, Anna leaned against the cutting table. "Do you want that email to exist?" I want her to tell herself the truth out loud. Publishing it is weather. The week moved like a choir. Voices rose and fell in the studio. A widow wanting a dress for her granddaughter's quinceanera, saying she thought her dancing days were done until I put her in this. A chef needing sleeves that wouldn't catch fire and elegance for a 10-hour shift. A professor who hadn't worn color in 20 years tried on a skirt the color of guava and laughed like she'd bitten fruit that finally tasted like itself. The cameras came back, this time with a second angle and someone capturing the way silk breathes. They filmed Anna taping paper patterns, me explaining bias cut. They asked if I'd forgiven my daughter. I said forgiveness isn't a switch, it's a seam you reinforce over time. Some days it holds. Some days it needs another pass. The documentary crew asked if Lila would sit for an interview. She said not yet, and I said I'm proud of that answer. They filmed the outside instead, winter sun sliding across glass. Near closing time, a woman stepped in with a stillness people write poems about. She introduced herself as Carmen Valdez from a foundation funding women-owned businesses in the Southwest. She'd seen the coverage, asked if we'd consider a small grant to hire 2 more seamstresses and buy a second heavy wool machine. Anna's grin overflowed. I asked what the foundation wanted in return. Carmen said nothing but for you to keep doing what you're doing, and maybe speak to our group about starting over at 62. I said starting over is what they call it when you finally return to yourself. That night, I held Daniel's photo and said out loud, "You would have loved this." Sometimes I forget to include the dead in news they would have made better. I set the photo back and placed my hands flat on the table where it all began. When I climbed into bed, my phone buzzed. An email from Lila. No subject. A few paragraphs like a door. She said I am sorry without excuses. She said I used cruelty as a shortcut to control. She said I want to be the kind of daughter who can stand next to the kind of mother you are and not turn fear into snobbery. I don't expect anything back. I love you. I would like to learn your hems. I lay in the familiar dark and let the seam hold for the night. Some days move like a river, others like a verdict. The day my daughter opened the studio door was both. We just signed a short-term lease on a corner space off Guadalupe Street with windows tall enough to make silk look like weather. The landlord, an optimist, said pay what you can for 2 months and bring empanadas if the check is late. Anna hung muslin curtains with brass clips. I arranged spools of thread by shade, a rainbow if the desert had invented it. The sign painter lettered Needle and North, with strokes that made my name feel like it belonged on glass. Before noon, 2 clients arrived. A retired firefighter who wanted to look tender without feeling exposed. A violinist whose shoulders carried her work and her joy. Fittings felt like the opposite of hiding. Lila stood on the sidewalk for a long time before coming in. She wore a coat the color of oyster shells and a face trained to show applause while calculating implications. When she crossed the threshold, she paused as if the air was heavier. "It's beautiful," she said, without qualifiers. "Thank you." Her eyes moved over the dress forms, photos of Noelle under string lights, of the firefighter in green crepe, the judge in midnight silk. She studied the room like a corner she might turn only if the view suited her. "The magazine piece," she began, and stopped. It had run that morning with a headline neither of us loved, "The Seamstress Who Stole the Season." The main story was generous, telling of a woman who made something with her hands and then with her life. The sidebar told a wedding day story, a bright room, and a sentence that landed like a slap. Faces blurred, intent clear. "You didn't know they'd include that," she said. "I didn't pitch it." They asked. I answered. I told the truth at a volume I could hear. Her mouth trembled. "I made a mistake. I was scared, trying to make everything perfect. I hurt you." "Yes." She looked toward the window where winter light made lace on the floor. "I need to fix it." "You can't fix it." "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Respect it. Pain doesn't vanish because the photos turned out pretty or because I built a business. It sits there like a marker, asking us to route around it so we stop driving over the same wound." She closed her eyes, then opened them with the look she had as a child handing me a broken toy. "Teach me. I don't know this part." We were interrupted by Mrs. Ortiz, a client arriving in a storm of gratitude for finding parking. She brought biscochitos because the studio needed to smell like Christmas in February. Lila stepped aside and watched as Mrs. Ortiz tried on a jacket I'd cut to fall where her story asked to be honored, not hidden. In the mirror she whispered, "There I am." Lila watched, and I watched Lila watching, and something in me loosened. After Mrs. Ortiz left, Lila walked to the photo wall. "I didn't know clothes could do this for people," she said. I thought it was just about looking nice. Anna came in then, cheeks bright from the cold. She saw the moment, slid into the space with ease. Hi. I'm Anna. I'm the calendar, the coffee, and the part of this that believes impossible just means we haven't done it yet. Lila smiled, thanked her for the Instagram post. They spoke about venues, vendors, and how weddings can turn love into a performance. For a few minutes, they were simply two women comparing notes in a sunlit room that smelled faintly of starch and cinnamon. When Lila left, she hugged me cautiously. At the door she said, "I'm going to write an email to the magazine. Not a correction, a confession. I want to tell them I laughed because I was scared you were bigger than the room, and I didn't know how to be the daughter of a woman who didn't need my approval. I won't promise to send it. I promise to write it." I nodded. Promises to yourself are the ones that teach your hands a new way to move. After she was gone, Anna leaned against the cutting table. Do you want that email to exist? I want her to tell herself the truth out loud. Publishing it is weather. The week moved like a choir. Voices rose and fell in the studio. A widow wanting a dress for her granddaughter's quinceanera, saying she thought her dancing days were done until I put her in this. A chef needing sleeves that wouldn't catch fire and elegance for a 10-hour shift. A professor who hadn't worn color in 20 years tried on a skirt the color of guava and laughed like she'd bitten fruit that finally tasted like itself. The cameras came back, this time with a second angle and someone capturing the way silk breathes. They filmed Anna taping paper patterns, me explaining bias cut. They asked if I'd forgiven my daughter. I said forgiveness isn't a switch, it's a seam you reinforce over time. Some days it holds. Some days it needs another pass. The documentary crew asked if Lila would sit for an interview. She said not yet, and I said I'm proud of that answer. They filmed the outside instead, winter sun sliding across glass. Near closing time, a woman stepped in with a stillness people write poems about. She introduced herself as Carmen Valdez from a foundation funding women-owned businesses in the Southwest. She'd seen the coverage, asked if we'd consider a small grant to hire 2 more seamstresses and buy a second heavy wool machine. Anna's grin overflowed. I asked what the foundation wanted in return. Carmen said nothing but for you to keep doing what you're doing, and maybe speak to our group about starting over at 62. I said starting over is what they call it when you finally return to yourself. That night, I held Daniel's photo and said out loud, "You would have loved this." Sometimes I forget to include the dead in news they would have made better. I set the photo back and placed my hands flat on the table where it all began. When I climbed into bed, my phone buzzed. An email from Lila. No subject. A few paragraphs like a door. She said I am sorry without excuses. She said I used cruelty as a shortcut to control. She said I want to be the kind of daughter who can stand next to the kind of mother you are and not turn fear into snobbery. I don't expect anything back. I love you. I would like to learn your hems. I lay in the familiar dark and let the seam hold for the night. Morning light filled the studio like warm water, touching every bolt of fabric stacked against the wall. The hum of Guadalupe Street came through the windows, delivery trucks, footsteps, the low rhythm of a bus engine idling at the corner. Anna was already at the cutting table, chalking a pattern onto a length of sapphire blue silk for a client who had requested something that feels like midnight, but won't disappear in photos. The grant from Carmen's foundation had moved fast. Within a week, we'd posted job notices in places we knew would reach women like us, craftswomen pushed out of factories, tailors told their skills were outdated. We hired 2 within days. Teresa, 58, with hands like braided rope from decades sewing upholstery in a warehouse that closed last spring. And Yvonne, 64, who used to make dance costumes until the studio switched to imports. They walked into the studio like people stepping onto a dock after years at sea, tentative, then steadier with each breath. By mid-morning, the four of us worked in a rhythm that didn't need much talking. Fabric hissed under irons. Thread snipped clean. Pins clicked into tomato-shaped cushions. Anna moved between stations with her notebook, updating deadlines, measuring yardage. The space felt like a kitchen where every dish mattered. A chime from the door broke our concentration. A tall woman entered, wrapped in a coat the color of old copper. She removed her gloves slowly, as if revealing something precious. "You must be Marisol," she said. Her voice had the resonance of someone used to microphones. "My name is Evelyn Moore. I conduct the Santa Fe Symphony." I'd never met a conductor before. She explained she was leading a gala performance next month, her 50th year in music, and wanted something that honored the occasion without making her feel like she was borrowing youth. She gestured to her shoulders. "I need to move freely. And I need to look like the music matters." We scheduled a consultation for the following week. She left with a swatch of the midnight silk Anna had been cutting, holding it the way some people hold seashells to their ear. When the door closed, Teresa exhaled. "A conductor," she said, shaking her head. "Never thought I'd be making gowns for someone like that." I told her I hadn't thought so either, but here we were, and it felt right. The afternoon brought a different kind of client, a woman named Sophia who owned a small bookstore near the rail yard. She was marrying her partner in a ceremony at the shop, among shelves of poetry and art books. She wanted a dress that could hold its own against the scent of paper and ink. "No white," she said. "Ivory makes me look like I've been up all night. I want color, deep, but not loud." Yvonne pulled a bolt of garnet crepe from the shelves. Sophia's eyes lit as if she'd found a first edition. By evening, the table was scattered with sketches and fabric samples. Anna updated the order board, sliding new projects into the queue. My own column read like a list of lives I'd been invited to witness: conductor, bookseller, retiree flying to Paris for her daughter's wedding, teacher celebrating 30 years in the classroom. I thought about the years I spent grading essays at my kitchen table, wishing for something I couldn't name. The wish had been this. The next morning, the documentary crew returned. This time, they set up 2 cameras, one fixed on the workroom, the other following me through fittings. The producer, a woman named Mel, asked me to narrate what I was doing, not just technically but emotionally. "Viewers want to know what goes through your mind as you pin a seam or choose a hem length," she said. So I told them. How a hemline can change a woman's stance. How fabric weight can whisper confidence or shout it. How I measure not just the body, but the way someone breathes when they see themselves in the mirror. They filmed a fitting with Sophia, capturing her reflection when the garnet crepe first draped over her shoulders. She didn't smile right away. She inhaled, held it, then let it out like a note finding its pitch. "Yes," she said simply. "This is me." Behind the camera, Mel mouthed the word perfect. That afternoon, Lila stopped by unannounced. She was in jeans and a soft gray sweater, hair pulled back. No coat of armor today. She brought a small bag. Inside was a bundle of vintage lace. "It was Nana's," she said. "From her wedding veil. I thought maybe, if you could use it in something." I turned the lace over in my hands, felt the fragility and the stubbornness of threads that had outlived decades. "I can," I said. "But only if it's for you." Her eyes flickered, then steadied. "Maybe someday," she said. She stayed for coffee. We didn't talk about the magazine, or the Vera, or the email she'd sent. We talked about Carmen's grant, Teresa's sharp eye for pattern alignment, Yvonne's quiet speed with hand-finished hems. She asked if I remembered the time she tried to sew her own Halloween costume in 6th grade and glued the zipper shut. We both laughed until Anna peeked in from the workroom to see what was so funny. After Lila left, Anna looked at me over the top of her glasses. "That felt different," she said. I nodded. It did. The following week, Evelyn returned for her first fitting. The midnight silk gown slid over her frame like it had been waiting for her all its life. She lifted her arms as if holding an invisible baton, tested the movement. "Yes," she said. "I could conduct Mahler in this." Teresa, basting the hem, grinned without looking up. Yvonne handed me a pin just when I needed it. The air in the studio felt like the moment before music begins. That night, Anna showed me a message from the documentary team. They'd cut a short teaser to promote the series. It featured Noelle's backyard wedding, Sophia's first fitting, and Evelyn in mid-conducting motion. The final clip was me at the cutting table saying, "Starting over is just what they call it when you finally return to yourself." The teaser went online Friday morning. By Saturday, the studio phone rang until we had to let calls go to voicemail. Emails flooded in. Some were from brides, but many were from women simply saying thank you for showing that 62 is not the end of anything worth starting. Sunday afternoon, I stayed in the studio after everyone left. The street outside was quiet, just the low hum of a street lamp. I unrolled Nana's lace on the table, smoothing it flat. I didn't know yet what it would become, but I knew it wouldn't be hidden in a drawer. Like the women who walked through our door, it deserved to be seen, not stored. As I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the glass. Not the woman from the hotel hallway months ago, holding her breath and her dress against her chest, but someone rooted. Someone who understood that making something beautiful is not just an act of skill, it's an act of defiance against every voice that ever said you weren't enough. The morning of Evelyn's final fitting began with snow. Not the heavy kind that shuts the city down, but a quiet drift that powdered the sidewalks along Guadalupe Street and softened every sound. Inside the studio, the air was warm with the scent of coffee and the faint mineral tang of steam from the irons. Teresa had arrived early to check the hem on Clarissa's teal silk dress. Yvonne was hand-stitching the lining into Sophia's garnet gown, her needle moving in small, precise arcs. Anna reviewed the week's orders with her pencil tapping against her notebook. "If we finish Evelyn's today, we can ship the Paris dress by Friday," she said. Evelyn arrived wrapped in a wool cape the color of dark wine. She carried her baton case under one arm, a habit so natural it felt like an extension of her. We helped her into the midnight silk gown, the fabric catching light as it slid over her shoulders. Teresa zipped the back, and Evelyn stepped onto the small platform in front of the mirror. She lifted her arms slowly, testing the range of motion. "Perfect," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I feel like I could conduct the world in this." The beading along the neckline shimmered under the studio lights, subtle but deliberate, like the opening notes of a piece that would build into something grand. We made a few final adjustments, then Anna snapped a photo for the portfolio. Evelyn asked if she could use the image for the gala program. "I want people to know this gown came from here," she said. I felt a swell in my chest that had nothing to do with silk. After she left, the studio buzzed with energy. Teresa began cutting fabric for Leah's orchard wedding dress, while Yvonne pressed a bolt of pale gold charmeuse for a new commission. The phone rang twice before Anna could answer. One call from a woman in Flagstaff asking about shipping options, the other from a local photographer offering to barter services for a custom jacket. Mid-afternoon, Carmen stopped by to check on the grant progress. She brought a folder of mentorship applications, young women eager to learn from experienced hands. "The Foundation's board loved your story," she said. "They want to feature Needle and North in our annual report." I thought of the first time she walked in, offering help before we knew we needed it, and felt the quiet gravity of that kind of generosity. While Carmen was still there, the door opened and in walked a woman with a weathered leather satchel. She introduced herself as Rose, a jeweler from Chimayo. She'd been following our work online and wondered if we'd consider collaborating, pairing custom gowns with pieces from her workshop for bridal portraits and events. She placed a small box on the cutting table. Inside was a silver cuff with turquoise inlay, the metal hand engraved in patterns that echoed the beadwork on one of our dresses. Yvonne turned it over in her hands. This belongs with the right fabric, she said. Rose smiled. That's exactly what I was thinking. By the time the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the floorboards, the studio felt like a crossroad, women arriving with skills, ideas, and stories, leaving with plans and possibilities. That evening, after everyone else left, I stayed behind to work on the Paris dress. It was for Marianne, a 65-year-old widow traveling to her daughter's wedding in the Marais district. She'd told me she wanted to look like someone who belongs in a French film, but without the subtitles. I'd chosen a deep navy silk crepe, cut in a bias that would move with her but never overwhelm her frame. As I pinned the hem, I thought about the women whose clothes I used to sew quietly at my kitchen table. Most of those pieces never had my name on them, never went anywhere but closets and local events. Now my work would walk into symphony halls, galleries, and weddings in cities I'd never see. And it had my name stitched inside. The bell over the door jingled. I looked up, expecting Anna. She often returned after dinner with tea or some new idea, but it was Lila. She carried a cardboard box, her cheeks flushed from the cold. I was cleaning out my closet, she said. I thought maybe you could use some of these fabrics. They've just been sitting there. She set the box on the table. Inside were lengths of silk, lace, and brocade, remnants from fashion school projects she'd abandoned years ago. Some still had basting stitches holding them together. I picked up a piece of blush pink satin. This is good fabric, I said. I know, she answered, her voice softer. I just didn't know what to do with it before. We talked for a while, about Evelyn's fitting, about Rose's jewelry, about the snow outside. She didn't bring up the magazine letter or the past. But when she left, she paused at the door and said, I like this place. It feels like you. Then she stepped out into the street, snowflakes catching in her hair. After she was gone, I ran my hand over the fabric she'd left. Some were wrinkled, some frayed at the edges, but all of them could become something beautiful. I stacked them neatly on a shelf. Before locking up, I walked to the front window. The street lamps reflected on the glass, framing the studio's interior in warm light. From outside, it must have looked like a small beacon against the snow. In the stillness, I thought about the next day's schedule, Clarissa's fitting, Leah's first muslin, a meeting with Rose to discuss the collaboration. I thought about the lace from Nana's veil, still waiting for the right moment. And I thought about Lila's voice when she said this place felt like me. It did. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The next morning, the snow had melted into thin streams along the gutters, and the air carried the scent of wet adobe and pine smoke. I unlocked the studio to find Teresa already inside, sipping coffee and humming under her breath while she laid out pattern pieces for Leah's orchard wedding dress. Yvonne arrived a few minutes later, cheeks flushed from the cold, carrying a paper bag of breakfast burritos she'd picked up from the stand near the plaza. We were halfway through our first bites when Clarissa arrived for her fitting. She'd traded her usual scarf for a single silver pendant, her short hair styled into soft waves. The teal silk shantung dress slipped over her like it had been waiting decades for her to come back to it. When she looked in the mirror, she touched her collarbone, almost shyly. I thought I'd feel like a stranger, she said. Instead, I returned. Teresa caught my eye in the mirror and gave the smallest nod. After Clarissa left, we set up for Leah's muslin fitting. She arrived with her fiancé, a tall man with sun-warmed skin and the kind of easy smile that made the room brighter. He sat quietly while we worked, occasionally looking up from his phone to say something that made her laugh. The muslin was rough, unbleached cotton standing in for the final ivory crepe, but it let us check proportions, adjust the skirt length, and perfect the pocket placement. They're perfect, Leah said, slipping her hands into them. I'll be able to sneak away with cake. Late morning, Rose from Chimayo returned with a few more pieces from her workshop. A pair of turquoise drop earrings, a delicate chain with a silver pendant, and a statement cuff shaped like an open flower. We laid them on the cutting table, matching them to fabric swatches. Sophia's garnet gown all but claimed the cuff, the deep red playing against the polished silver like they'd been designed together. Anna came in just as Rose was leaving, carrying the latest issue of Pacific Sunday. "You're on page 3, she said, flipping it open to reveal a follow-up piece about Needle and North's rapid growth. The photo showed me pinning a hem on Evelyn's gown, my expression one of quiet concentration. The article was short but warm, noting the studio's commitment to employing experienced seamstresses and mentoring younger ones. It felt like a small step, but a steady one. Around midday, Carmen stopped in with 2 women from the Foundation's mentorship program. One was in her early 30s, the other barely 20. Both had calloused hands and nervous eyes. We gave them a tour, introduced them to Teresa and Yvonne, and showed them how we organized projects. "You can watch, ask questions, try small tasks," I told them. "This isn't just about learning stitches, it's about learning how to listen to fabric, and to people." While they shadowed Yvonne at the ironing board, I worked on Marianne's Paris dress. The navy silk crepe caught the light like deep water. I was easing the bodice onto the skirt when the phone rang. Anna answered, then covered the receiver. "It's the Chronicle," she mouthed. "They want to schedule photos." I nodded and kept sewing. In the afternoon, a new client named Dolores came in. She was 72, with sharp eyes and a voice that could cut through wind. She wanted a dress for her grandson's graduation party. "Not black," she said firmly. "I've buried enough in my life. I want something alive." We settled on a rich emerald charmeuse that made her eyes spark. As she left, she said, "Make it so they can't forget I was there." By the end of the day, the studio felt full, not just with people and fabric, but with the hum of work that mattered. The mentorship students lingered a little longer, watching Teresa finish a sleeve with a precision that made them whisper to each other. After everyone left, I stayed behind to baste the lining into Marianne's dress. Outside, the street lamps flickered on, and the glass reflected the warm light inside. I was pinning the last section when the bell over the door jingled. Lila stepped in, cheeks pink from the cold. "I didn't think you'd still be here," she said. She carried a small box tied with string. "I found this in Nana's sewing basket." Inside was a packet of antique buttons, mother of pearl with tiny etched designs. I thought maybe they could go with the lace. I ran my thumb over the cool surface of one button. "They could," I said. "But only for something worth them." She leaned against the cutting table. "I like seeing this place at night. It's quieter, but it feels anchored." We stood there in companionable silence until she finally said, "When I sent you that letter, I thought it might make you angry again. But I needed to write it." I told her it didn't make me angry, it made me see that she was trying to look directly at herself. Before she left, she glanced toward the shelf where her old fabric Saturday. "Maybe someday you'll find a use for those too." Then she slipped out into the evening, the door closing with its familiar soft chime. I turned back to Marianne's dress, the buttons from Nana's basket still resting in my palm. I didn't know what they would become yet, but I knew they deserved a story as deliberate as their making. The week leading up to Evelyn's gala was the kind of steady chaos that makes a studio feel alive. Every table was occupied, every machine humming, every conversation carrying equal parts focus and laughter. Teresa worked on Dolores's emerald charmeuse, Yvonne finished the final hand stitches on Sophia's garnet gown, and I alternated between Marianne's Paris dress and a new commission for a woman named Janice, a retired park ranger who wanted a formal jacket, strong enough for a handshake, soft enough for a hug. On Monday morning, Rose stopped by with the turquoise drop earrings she'd promised for Leah's orchard wedding. She placed them next to the ivory crepe and smiled. "These will catch the light in the branches," she said. Leah would pick them up after her second fitting later in the week. The thought of that wedding, bare feet in grass, pockets full of cake, made me smile while I worked. The Chronicle photographer arrived mid-morning, a tall man named Carl who carried 2 cameras and spoke in a voice just above a whisper. He took wide shots of the studio, then close-ups of my hands as I basted the lining into Marianne's dress. He photographed Teresa threading her needle without looking, Yvonne pressing a seam until it lay perfectly flat, Anna updating the order board with her neat handwriting. Before leaving, he asked me to stand in the doorway beneath the Needle and North sign. "It's not just the work," he said, "it's the doorway you opened." That afternoon, we had a mentorship session with the 2 trainees, Maya and Isabel. I gave them each a small piece of silk and a needle, and asked them to sew a straight seam by hand. "It's not about speed," I said. "It's about letting the fabric tell you when you're pushing too hard." Maya's stitches were even but tight, Isabel's were looser, wavering in places. "Both of you did exactly what I expected," I told them. "And both of you can get better." Tuesday brought Evelyn back for a final check before the gala. She stepped into the midnight silk, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The gown fit perfectly, the beading catching the light with every small movement. "It's everything I hoped for," she said. "And more." Teresa beamed as she carried the garment bag to Evelyn's car, careful to avoid even the hint of a wrinkle. Midweek, Leah came for her second fitting. The ivory crepe flowed like water, the pockets invisible until she slipped her hands into them with a grin. Rose's turquoise earrings matched her eyes exactly. "This feels like me," she said. "Not some idea of a bride, just me." Thursday evening, as the others packed up, I stayed to work on Janice's jacket. The forest green wool was thick but forgiving, with a satin lining the color of moss. I just finished setting the sleeves when the bell over the door rang. It was Lila, again without calling first. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, her hair loose. "I just came from a client dinner," she said. I didn't want to go home yet. She wandered around the studio, running her fingers lightly over fabrics and dress forms. "It smells like Nana's sewing room in here. The steam, the fabric, it's familiar." I told her about Rose's jewelry, about Evelyn's final fitting, about the Chronicle photos. She listened quietly, then said, "You sound happy." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "I am." She lingered by the shelf with Nana's lace and the vintage buttons. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about having something made. Not for a wedding or an event. Just, for me. Something I could wear and know it came from here." My hands stilled over the wool jacket. "Whenever you're ready," I said. "We'll make it." Friday morning, Carmen called to tell us the foundation wanted to sponsor a small public event in the studio, a showcase where clients could model their pieces, and the mentorship trainees could present work in progress. "Think of it as a community open house," she said. Anna's eyes lit up immediately. "We can set up a photo wall, have Rose bring jewelry, maybe even a live musician," she said. The idea spread through the room like warmth. That afternoon, Marianne came for her final fitting before Paris. The navy silk crepe draped exactly as I'd imagined, moving with her like a second skin. When she looked in the mirror, her eyes softened. "It's been a long time since I felt beautiful in my own clothes," she said. "You've given me that." After she left, the studio was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. I found myself standing at the window, looking out at the street. Snow had been replaced by crisp winter light, the kind that turns every surface into something sharper, truer. I thought about the months since La Fonda, about how much of my life had been rebuilt without permission from anyone but me. Before locking up, I took Nana's lace down from the shelf and spread it across the cutting table. The vintage buttons sat beside it, catching the light. I didn't know yet what they would become, but I knew they were waiting for the right story. As I turned off the lights, the phone buzzed with a text from Lila. "Dinner next week?" No agenda, just dinner. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Yes." When I stepped outside, the cold bit at my cheeks, but the sky above Guadalupe Street was a deep, endless blue. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I was walking toward it. Saturday morning began with the kind of winter light that feels like it's been filtered through silver. I arrived early to prep for the day's fittings, unlocking the front door as the smell of coffee from the cafe down the block drifted in. Inside, the studio still held the quiet from overnight, bolts of fabric standing like sentinels along the walls. Teresa came in carrying a paper bag of fresh croissants. "Fuel for a busy day," she said, setting them on the counter. Yvonne followed, balancing a thermos of tea and a box of pins. Within half an hour, the machines were threaded, the irons hot, and the order board updated. Our first client was Dolores for her emerald charmeuse fitting. She stepped into the dress, the fabric catching the light in ripples as she moved. "It's exactly what I wanted," she said, turning slowly in front of the mirror. "Alive." The word hung in the air. Teresa made a few chalk marks for minor adjustments, but the gown already looked like it had been part of Dolores's story for years. Next came Sophia, back for the final fitting of her garnet gown. Rose had dropped off the silver cuff earlier that morning, and when Sophia slipped it onto her wrist, it was as though the dress had been waiting for that exact moment. She stood in front of the mirror, eyes bright. "I feel like the main character," she said. "Not just at the wedding, anywhere." Mid-morning, Carmen arrived with flyers for the open house event. 2 weeks from today, she reminded us. Anna began sketching a floor plan for the showcase, figuring out where models would stand, where guests could mingle, and how to display Rose's jewelry. The mentorship trainees, Maya and Isabel, listened closely, excitement clear in their faces. While the others worked, I started cutting fabric for Janice's forest green jacket. The wool yielded to the shears with a satisfying snip, the satin lining pooling like moss in a stream. Janice had stopped by earlier in the week to drop off photos of her park ranger days, standing in front of mountain ranges, holding trail maps, her smile as steady as the landscape behind her. She'd said the jacket should carry some of that same grounded strength. Around lunchtime, Lila called. "I know it's short notice," she began, "but would you mind if I came by for a bit? I want to see the Paris dress before you ship it." I told her to come. She arrived half an hour later, wearing a camel coat and carrying a small paper bag. Inside were 2 green chili turnovers from a bakery we used to visit when she was in high school. "Thought you might need lunch," she said. I set them on the counter, and she followed me to where Marianne's dress hung, ready for packing. She ran her fingers lightly over the navy crepe. "It's beautiful," she said. "She's lucky to have something made just for her." I thought about the times I'd tried to make things just for Lila, how some had been received, others pushed aside. But I didn't say it. Instead, I told her about Marianne's upcoming trip, about how she'd wanted to look like someone in a French film. Lila stayed for nearly an hour, chatting with Teresa and Yvonne, asking Maya and Isabel about their mentorship. When she left, she hugged me, a little longer than usual. "Dinner next week," she reminded me. The afternoon brought Leah's final fitting. She wore the ivory crepe dress with ease, the turquoise earrings from Rose swinging gently as she moved. The pockets were invisible until she slipped her hands into them, grinning. "It's perfect," she said. "It feels like home." By closing time, the studio felt like it had lived 3 days in one. We cleaned the tables, covered the dress forms, and turned off the machines. As the others packed up, Anna handed me a list of confirmed participants for the open house. "We've got 11 clients modeling their pieces," she said. "It's going to be something." After everyone left, I stayed a while, finishing the lining on Janice's jacket. The street outside grew quieter, the light fading to that deep blue that comes just before night. I was sewing the last few inches when the phone buzzed with a message from Marianne, a photo of her standing in front of a mirror, wearing the navy dress, her suitcase open on the bed behind her. "Paris awaits," the caption read. I smiled, imagining her walking through the streets of the Marais, the fabric catching light from shop windows, strangers glancing twice because beauty, real beauty, always makes you look again. Before locking up, I walked to the front window. Across the street, the reflection showed the studio's warm interior framed by the winter night. I thought of the months since the wedding at La Fonda, the way each step had led here, not in a straight line, but in a pattern that made sense only when you stood back to see it. When I turned off the lights and stepped outside, the cold air met me like a clean page. 2 weeks until the open house. 2 weeks until we filled this place not just with dresses and jewelry, but with the women who wore them, their laughter, their stories, their proof that it's never too late to be seen. The week before the open house began with a kind of purposeful electricity. The order board was full, the dress forms wore works in progress, and the air was scented with steam from the irons and the faint sweetness of fabric sizing. Anna had taped a large sheet of butcher paper to the wall, sketching out the event timeline, arrival, mingling, showcase, photos, closing remarks. Rose had confirmed she'd bring a full display of jewelry. Carmen promised light catering from a local cafe. Teresa worked steadily on Dolores's final adjustments, while Yvonne finished Janice's forest green jacket, adding a single hand-covered button that matched the satin lining. When Janice came to pick it up, she put it on and stood in front of the mirror with her hands in the pockets. "It feels like it belongs to me already," she said. "Like I've owned it in another life." Maya and Isabel spent the morning steaming dresses for the showcase, learning the difference between removing wrinkles and reshaping fabric. "Every pass of the iron changes the garment," Teresa told them. "Treat it like a conversation, not a command." Midday, the Chronicle article went online, accompanied by Carl's photographs. One showed me leaning over the cutting table, pins in my mouth, focused entirely on the fabric beneath my hands. Another captured Evelyn mid-motion, the midnight silk rippling as if it were part of the music. The headline read, "Needle and North, Stitching Stories into Style." The comments poured in, praise for the craft, for employing women with decades of experience, for giving clients garments that fit their bodies and their lives. Some comments shared personal stories of mothers and grandmothers who had sewn for love, not money, and how seeing our work made them remember those hands. That afternoon, Lila arrived for a surprise visit. She wore jeans and a navy coat, her hair pulled back. "I saw the article," she said, holding up her phone. "It's good. Really good." She lingered in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. "I was wondering if I could ask you something." She hesitated, then said, "I want to be part of the open house. Not as a client, exactly, but maybe wearing something from here. Something you make for me." My hands stilled. "For you?" She nodded. "Something simple. Not to impress anyone, just to stand in what you've built." We talked about color, shape, and how she wanted to feel, comfortable but intentional. In the end, she chose a deep plum wool crepe with a soft drape. I made a quick sketch, and she smiled in a way that felt both familiar and new. "Let's do it," she said. The rest of the week blurred into fittings, alterations, and logistics. Leah picked up her orchard wedding dress, slipping it into a garment bag with care. Sophia returned for final photos in her garnet gown and silver cuff. Dolores stopped by with a tray of biscochitos, for luck, insisting we freeze some for the day of the event. 2 days before the open house, the documentary crew arrived to capture behind-the-scenes footage. They interviewed clients about their pieces, filmed Maya and Isabel practicing hems under Teresa's watchful eye, and recorded Anna organizing jewelry displays with Rose. They asked me about the transformation from my kitchen table to this studio. I told them it wasn't just a change of location, it was a change of scale, of seeing my work as something that could stand on its own legs instead of hiding in the corner. That evening, I stayed late to start on Lila's dress. The plum wool felt warm under my fingers, the fabric giving just enough with each cut of the shears. I thought about the times I'd sewn for her without being asked, about the dress that started all of this, about how different it felt to be making something she had chosen to wear. On the morning before the open house, the studio was a flurry of final touches. Teresa finished pressing Evelyn's gown for display, Yvonne adjusted the length of Marianne's navy dress on the mannequin, and Anna checked the catering list twice. Rose arrived with her jewelry, each piece polished until it caught the light from the tall windows. Lila came in for her fitting. The dress slipped over her shoulders, the plum color deepening the warmth in her skin. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment before speaking. "It's me," she said quietly. "Just steadier." I pinned the hem, adjusted the waist slightly. "It's you," I agreed. She turned, the fabric moving with her like it understood her pace. For the first time since the day at La Fonda, I felt no tension in my chest when I looked at her reflection beside mine. After she changed back into her jeans, she lingered at the cutting table. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the dress. For letting me be part of this." I told her she already was. That night, I walked through the studio alone, checking each display, smoothing each garment. The air was still, holding the anticipation of the next day. In the window, the reflection showed the space exactly as I'd imagined it when Carmen first mentioned the grant, full, lit, and ready. As I locked the door, I thought about the journey here, not a straight path, but one stitched together from choices, each seam holding more than just thread. Tomorrow, the studio would open its doors not just to clients, but to neighbors, friends, and strangers who might leave as something else entirely. The morning of the open house broke clear and cold, the kind of air that makes you stand a little straighter. I arrived early, key in hand, to find Anna already inside arranging the catering tables. The scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the studio. She grinned. "We're ready." Teresa and Yvonne arrived moments later, arms full of garment bags. Teresa carried Evelyn's midnight silk gown like it was a crown jewel. Yvonne brought Leah's ivory orchard dress, the turquoise earrings from Rose pinned carefully to the hanger. We set each piece on dress forms, spacing them so the fabrics could breathe and the light could touch them. By 10 o'clock, the jewelry table gleamed under the tall windows. Rose herself stood behind it, polishing a silver cuff one last time. Carmen arrived with foundation board members, handing out programs listing each featured garment and its story. Maya and Isabel moved through the room in matching black aprons, greeting early arrivals and answering questions about the process. The first wave of guests included clients, friends, and curious neighbors. Dolores arrived in her emerald charmeuse, the color glowing under the studio lights. Sophia stood beside her garnet gown, wearing the silver cuff like it was armor. Leah posed near her orchard dress, laughing as a photographer asked her to twirl. Midway through the morning, Evelyn walked in wearing the midnight silk. The gown shimmered with every step, the beadwork catching the light like quiet applause. Conversations hushed for a moment before the room picked up again, voices warmer now. The documentary crew moved quietly among the guests, capturing candid moments, Teresa explaining a seam, Yvonne demonstrating hand-stitching, Anna laughing with Carmen near the catering table. I found myself speaking with a woman I'd never met, who said she'd come because she read the Chronicle piece and wanted to see if the place felt like the article sounded. "It does," she said simply. Near noon, Lila arrived. She wore the plum wool dress, simple and strong, her hair loose around her shoulders. She walked in without hesitation, greeting Teresa and Yvonne, hugging Anna, shaking hands with Carmen. When she reached me, she smiled. "It feels good to be here," she said. Carmen called for everyone's attention, thanking the guests for coming and the clients for allowing their garments to be part of the showcase. Then she handed me the floor. I spoke about the journey from my kitchen table to this studio, about the women who had trusted us with their stories, and the team that turned those stories into something you could touch. When I finished, there was a ripple of applause. Lila stepped forward, unplanned, and said, "I'd like to say something." The room quieted. "I'm Marisol's daughter," she began. I haven't always understood what this work means, but I do now. And I'm proud to stand here in something she made for me, not because I'm her daughter, but because she's an artist. The applause this time was louder, warmer. I felt a knot in my chest loosen that I didn't realize I'd still been carrying. The rest of the day moved in a rhythm of conversation, fittings for curious guests, and photos at the display wall. Maya and Isabel each presented a small project, a silk scarf with hand-rolled edges and a linen vest with precise top stitching. Guests admired them, offering encouragement that made both young women stand taller. As the event wound down, Carmen pulled me aside. "You've built something rare," she said. "Don't be surprised when it grows faster than you planned." Rose joined us, suggesting a collaborative show next year featuring gowns and jewelry in one gallery space. I told them both I'd think about it, knowing in my bones the answer would be yes. By late afternoon, the crowd thinned to a few lingering conversations. Evelyn left for the Symphony Hall, Sophia for her friend's wedding, Dolores for her grandson's game. Leah hugged everyone before heading to Las Cruces. The studio felt like it had exhaled after holding its breath all day. Lila stayed to help pack up, carefully returning each garment to its bag, wrapping jewelry, folding tablecloths. When the last piece was stored, she leaned against the cutting table and looked around. "This place, it's not just a shop. It's a world you made." "It's ours," I said, glancing toward Teresa, Yvonne, Anna, and the trainees gathering their things. "It works because of all of us." She nodded. "I see that now." When everyone had gone, we stood in the doorway together, looking out at Guadalupe Street in the early winter dusk. The street lamps had just flickered on, casting soft halos on the pavement. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lila said, "I don't know where we go from here, but I'd like to keep finding out." I smiled. So would I. As she walked to her car, I stepped back inside, turning slowly to take in the empty studio. The tables were clear, the machines silent, but the air still felt charged, full of the day's voices, the brush of fabric, the clink of jewelry, the sound of a seam being pressed flat. It was the quiet after music, the kind that leaves you aware of your own heartbeat. I thought about the first dress, the one folded in tissue paper that had once been called rustic and thrift store. That dress had never been worn by the daughter I made it for, but it had been the first thread in a tapestry I didn't know I was weaving. Now, months later, the pattern was visible. And it was beautiful. The day after the open house, the studio was still. The tables were bare except for a few stray pins and a folded length of muslin. Sunlight came in at a sharp angle through the tall windows, dust motes drifting in the quiet like slow confetti. Teresa and Yvonne had taken the day off, Anna was home catching up on paperwork, and I was alone for the first time in weeks. I moved slowly through the space, touching the back of a chair here, the edge of the cutting table there, as if reacquainting myself with a familiar room after a long trip. In the corner, Nana's lace and the mother-of-pearl buttons still waited, untouched. I set them on the table, knowing today I'd finally decide what they would become. The phone buzzed with a message from Carmen, a link to a local news article about the open house, accompanied by a photo of me and Lila standing side by side, both smiling, not politely, but like people who had arrived at the same place without losing themselves on the way. I sent her back a thank you, then clicked through to read the piece. It described the event, the garments, and the client's stories, but what caught me was the closing line, "Needle and North isn't just a studio, it's a testament to what happens when craft meets courage." Around mid-morning, Lila came in. She wore the plum dress again, layered with a cardigan, her hair tucked behind her ears. "I didn't want the day yesterday to be the last time I wore this," she said. She helped me move a few things back into place, then sat on a stool at the cutting table. "I've been thinking," she began, "about the dress you made for me all those months ago. I want to see it again." I hesitated only a moment before unlocking the cabinet in the back where I'd stored it. The ivory charmeuse unfolded like a memory, the beadwork catching the light exactly as it had the day I carried it out of La Fonda. She touched the fabric gently. "It's more beautiful than I remembered," she said. I didn't see it then, not really. We stood there, neither of us speaking, the weight of the months between then and now resting quietly on the table. Finally, she said, "I don't know if you'll ever want me to wear it, but I'd like to keep it here. Where it belongs." I nodded. "It already belongs here." In the afternoon, I sat down with the lace and buttons, sketching a jacket with a collar edged in the delicate pattern and cuffs fastened with the pearl discs. Not for sale. Not for a client. Something for me. The thought made me smile. How rare it was for me to sew without a deadline or a fitting waiting on the other end. As the light shifted toward evening, Anna stopped by with a stack of envelopes, thank you cards from clients who'd been part of the open house. I read them slowly, Evelyn's neat handwriting, Dolores's looping script, a postcard from Leah with a photo of her wedding under the pecan trees. One note came from Marianne, postmarked from Paris, saying the dress had walked with her down cobblestone streets and into conversations with strangers who asked where it came from. When Anna left, I stayed at the cutting table, running my fingers over the fabric swatches, thinking about what came next. We had orders booked into the summer, a waiting list growing longer by the week, and a team that worked like a family built on skill instead of obligation. The documentary would air in February, and Carmen had hinted at another grant for expanding into a second location. But more than any of that, I thought about what had shifted inside me. I was no longer measuring my worth by a single person's approval. The studio wasn't a way to fill the silence, it was a way to speak. Before I turned off the lights, I carried the ivory dress to the display wall and hung it on a mannequin. Not in shame, not in bitterness, but in acknowledgement. It wasn't a relic of rejection anymore. It was the first proof that I could walk away from something that didn't see my value and build a life that did. Outside, Guadalupe Street was lit with the golden haze of early evening. I locked the door and stood for a moment, looking back through the glass at the studio, warm, ready, and mine. If you've been with me through this story, you've seen how a single moment can unravel the life you thought you had and stitch together something new. Maybe you've had your own version of that hotel hallway, or your own table where you spread out the work of your hands and decide it's worth more than anyone told you. And if you have, I want you to remember this: you're allowed to start over. You're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to take the thing that broke you and make it into something that holds. So if this story has stayed with you, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next, drop a comment telling me your needle and north moment, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the only thing standing between you and the life you want is one stitch. And you can make that stitch today.